My name is Dan Bush. I am director of the School Financial Services team at the Department of Research. Welcome to our webinar on getting ready for ESSA school level expenditure reporting. This is something that has been a few years in the making, and we're really close to getting ready to moving on to the next step in our process for reporting this new requirement. So your colleagues in your school district business offices have been talking about this for a few years. I'm hoping this has come up in some of your administrative team meetings thus far. And now we're kind of moving on to the next step as we get ready for launching our data in our initial data launch for 2018-19 reports. The Every Student Succeeds Act replaced the previous No Child Left Behind, which was the reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, the federal government's main education funding program, which covers Title I and the other title programs. ESSA was enacted in late 2015. And one of the new provisions of the law, which I'm not going to read word for word, was to create a new financial transparency reporting requirement for all public schools across the country. What it does, it is essentially creates two responsibilities. The first one of those is to report per pupil federal and non-federal costs for each school to us at the DPI. Our responsibility in turn is to collect this data and report it to the public on our ESSA report card, which we are implementing through WiseDash. The U.S. Department of Ed has been collecting this information from state websites and will have a national database available as well. The purpose for this requirement, at least the goal, is to promote financial transparency of how resources, i.e. dollars, are being allocated to schools on a per student basis. The idea is that data can be used to drive improvements and promote greater fairness and equity for all students. The basic process for getting ready for this, which your business offices have been going through, is to first of all identify costs by one of three types, then identify costs either by individual schools or with your district or LEA as a whole. Then that information is reported to us at the department, and we do the actual per pupil math, so you don't have to. The first type of costs are federal. These are costs funded with federal program dollars like Title I, IDEA, Carl Perkins, those types of things. For some districts, mostly in northern Wisconsin, they receive federal impact aid based on federal lands within their districts. It is more or less a payment in lieu of taxes, although if you ask a business manager from a district with a lot of federal lands, they will tell you that it doesn't make up quite as much as they would get if it were private and taxed by the district. Second type of costs are state or local costs, and that's everything that's funded with property taxes, state aid, state grants, student fees, gifts, bank interest, all those different funding sources that a district can have. There's also a third type that we call exclusions. And exclusions are a set of costs, could be federally funded, could be state or local funded, but these are costs that you can exclude from your peer pupil comparisons and your per pupil amounts. And the reason for that is that there are certain costs that aren't really related to your budgeting decisions year to year in terms of what actually goes on with staff and instruction in the classroom. They are indirectly related, but they aren't part of that year to year resource allocation. These can include things like your district debt service, which is taxed for separately, costs of buildings and other capital projects. So we wouldn't want to say that in the year you're building a school, you're spending $50,000 a kid or $100,000 a kid for that school. That just wouldn't make any sense. Food service in Wisconsin is one of the recommended exclusions. Community programs and services, some people will call this Fund 80. There are other types of costs like this that are meant to be in that exclusion to keep dollars out of what really is meant to be a per pupil indication of dollars being spent at a school to educate kids in a particular year. Now, the way that we're going to be reporting this information was worked out between DPI, 38 other states, 20 large urban districts, under the guidance of some experts at Georgetown University. We have what they call the Edunomics Lab, looking at school finance data and research. And the result of those discussions over a period of a couple of years was what's called the Interstate Financial Reporting Framework. There's a link to this in the slide, and we'll post the slides on the School Finance Team website after the presentation. But it has been officially endorsed by the U.S. Department of Ed. Their guidance on implementing this requirement was a few years in coming. The change in administrations that took place back in 2016, 2017. But when they did finally put out their guidance, they specifically referenced this format. So it is fully compliant with the law. Just to give you a preview of what this looks like, and I should tell you that you are the very, very first people, really outside of myself and our IT folks, to get a look at this. This is our WiseDash testing server that has actual data built in. I've taken some screenshots to show you kind of how this is laid out. I should say this is mostly real data. It's a snapshot that was taken earlier this spring for them to use in development. I have taken out the district specifics from the screenshots, but just to give you an idea of what it looks like, there's going to be a data table built in that Interstate Financial Reporting Framework. The first piece of that is the enrollments. These are from your WISE data, third Friday of September 2018 snapshot. So this is not your membership pupil count used for school finance that your business office and enrollment folks have been working on so diligently over the past couple of weeks. Those are counts that are created for finance purposes and based on where a kid lives. But these are enrollments, kids that you're actually educating in your schools that are reported directly from your SIS to WISE data. These enrollment counts, at least on first view, will match what is in your WiseDash public reporting with one exception, and that is multi-district virtual charter schools. Some of you might know, like Rural Virtue Academy, JEDI, those types of schools. Each participating district in those programs has their own version, their own slice of that school. But for school level reporting, just like for school level school report cards and accountability, all of those kids are assigned with the host district. So if your district has a slice of one of those schools, but you're not the host, you're going to see a 0 enrollment for that multi-district virtual charter. Then we've got per pupil expenditures for each school. So these are dollars that your business office has reported as going into a particular school. Things like classroom teachers, principals, things of that nature. And those do have a total as well as a breakout between the federal and the state local funded costs. Similarly, there's also a district portion, both shown as a total and split between federal and state local. This is the same set of per pupil numbers for every school. All of the costs that are reported at the district LEA level are divided by the total enrollment. So every school is going to have a total that's made of the school's own per pupil number for costs at the school, and then the district-wide per pupil number for administration, enrollment, curriculum development, those types of things. Combine those two and you get a total amount of per pupil expenditures by school. This is really kind of what people are going to be focusing on. It's been the focus in states that have already launched this reporting requirement on their websites. It's what folks in Wisconsin who have been looking at some of the preliminary budget data we had, this is what they focus on. Really, for most of the rest of today, we're going to be going over talking about this information, these per pupil totals. There's also a graphical display, and this is stacked a little bit differently. It's not in the same order, but visually, just to make it clear to the public, that sort of gold and orange section is the state local piece, and the blue and teal section is the federal piece, and then those are broken down also by school and then district or LEA level. Just to kind of illustrate dollars-wise how little involvement the federal government has in per pupil spending and how targeted it is in certain schools. Just illustrating the fact that most school funding in Wisconsin and our other states really comes from property taxes and state aid. So we are not an outlier there. There's also some extra data at the bottom just to kind of help reconcile the totals to the district's other financial reports. We've got a dollar amount for exclusions. So you'll notice that between the school and district costs, this particular district had $59 million in 2018-19, but then their exclusions amount was actually almost $82 million. That again, reflective of constructing a school building or two on a referendum. So this is just kind of final pieces. All of the exclusions that your district LEA will report get listed on this page as well, so people can see what all goes into that 81 million number shown. So that's what's going to go up on November 19th for public view. One thing that I think everybody who's been involved with school leadership is comfortable with and used to talking about school level achievement data. It long predates the school report cards. School leaders have been using assessments and achievement data for decades now. So this is not a new, but at least for us in Wisconsin, adding the financial perspective to school level data, that is a new dimension. And that is kind of what we need to get up to speed. I'm really glad to be talking to you specifically as principals, because this is going to be, we're used to having building budget conversations, but sort of that total per pupil spending based on staffing and things. This will be a new piece for principals, which I think is a good thing. Just to reassure you, dollar amounts are not going to be going on the state report card. Although the report cards were put on hold for this year due to COVID, there's nothing in state law that requires us to put this on the state report card. But I give that with the caveat of yet. I think if you've been following the accountability topic for a long time, if you see what other states are doing with their state accountability systems, and for ESSA, this dollar amount is part of the reporting for sort of the ESSA version of a report card. Once these data are public, I'm sure the policy discussion will start about adding the number to the state report card. But I don't think we can wait for an actual statute to get enacted into law by the legislature and governor, because once these data are public, people will start connecting the two. They already have with some of the preliminary budget data that was put out. Other states, this is going on. You really need to start thinking about them as though they are linked, even if they aren't specifically linked on the report card. Kind of the question that we've been posing is how to prepare for this discussion as school leaders, principals, district administrators, business officials, board members, etc. And really the best answer that we've been able to give, and then the advice that I'll give to you today, is to know your stories of your schools and your kids in your district and be able to talk about why your numbers are what they are. The folks at the Georgetown Edunomics Lab, over a number of years, they did some field research, interviewed many school leaders from across the country, superintendents, principals, folks like that. And one thing that they found is that most, not all, but most of the school leaders that they interviewed in their field work didn't have a sense of the true and complete picture of all the financial resources allocated to specific schools. And I do have an idea of why this might come from, because this is my own experience in a district. It's very common in school districts in Wisconsin and across the country to have essentially a siloed budgeting process. The pay plan is its own thing. We look at it as its whole. What kind of increases are people going to get? What kind of progression they're going to get? Then there are supply and material and curriculum budgets that go to classrooms. That's something when I was in a district that the principals were very, very involved with, very strong advocates for. We look at our federal grant programs kind of as a set aside or as their own piece. buildings and grounds. Sometimes we look at individual building needs. Sometimes we just look at an overall budget. And these things tend to operate sort of in their own separate silos, separate areas. So one thing that this school over reporting requirement is meant to do is to bring all of those things together back to the level of the school and see how all of these separate decisions are combining to allocate financial resources at different schools. The second thing that the Edunomics folks found in their interviews is that most school leaders they talk to do not have a good sense of how well their schools are taking their investments that they're making in instructional technology, staff coaching, etc., how those are translating into outcomes, improvements for students in achievement and getting ready for college and career. So there have been a lot of money put over the past decade or so into things like one-to-one devices, greater career and tech education, things like that. How would we talk about how those investments are doing? How are they moving the needle for our kids? And that's really tough to do when all of your financial information is still at the gross district level. One thing that I want to be clear and absolutely explicit about is that these numbers will be used for comparison. That is what they were designed for. That is what the senators, the chairperson and the ranking member of the Senate Education Committee, when ESSA was being drafted, were kind of the two lead advocates for this provision. But there were a lot of interest groups from across the political spectrum, from school choice to ed reform to civil rights groups. All of those folks were really unified in wanting to have this information out there. And part of it is to compare what schools are doing and how dollars are being allocated. But I think we also know that there is no such thing as a perfect way for having perfectly comparable numbers that will make sense next to each other as a true apples to apples comparison. So we'll get as close as we can, and that's the purpose of the ESSA law, but it's not going to be perfect. Just to give a theoretical, completely made up example, I've got a couple of fictional schools here with about a $3,500 difference in their per pupil spending. And on sort of that first level, what I was talking about, connecting that to school accountability, the higher spending school has higher rating on the state report card than the lower spending school. Somebody might want to stop here. Okay, so one school's doing something right and one school's doing something wrong. But I think we know that there's more to the story than that. A bigger school, particularly a high school, is better able to enjoy economies of scale in terms of administrative staff, course offerings, technology, things like that. That there's a certain level of curriculum that all families and us, the department, expect high school kids to get. And a smaller school, you just aren't able to amortize those costs over as many kids. Part of the state that you're in definitely matters. We all have been following the reports for many years about teacher shortages, fewer kids coming out of programs, particularly subject specific, those types of things. And districts in northern Wisconsin definitely have a harder time attracting and retaining folks for that than districts in central and southern Wisconsin. If a school is a Title I school, by definition, they get more money. One of the requirements of Title I is called supplement, not supplant, meaning that those dollars are supposed to be in addition to. So all other things equal, a Title I school ought to have a higher per pupil number than a non-Title I school. Otherwise, somebody's not following that requirement. One piece that can make a big difference, but isn't necessarily obvious, is the health insurance plan. A school that in the decade or so since Act 10 happened, a district that is stuck to more of a traditional point of service model, like used to be common in the old contract days, that is definitely going to be a higher cost on the district compared to employers who have shifted more to a high deductible or an HMO type model that shifts some of the risk and cost onto the employee. This can manifest itself in the per pupil numbers. I could have come up with 50 more things that could, come into a comparison like this. But the fact of the matter is that when it gets to people actually publicly reporting on talking about this number, this is about all you're likely to see in the paper. Maybe an article about how your high school stacks up against the other high schools in the conference. It's up to you as school leaders to be able to provide context for this information. Moving ahead, the 2018-19 per pupil school level expenditure data for Wisconsin will be released on November 19th, 2020. Initially, the plan had been to release 2018-19 data this past spring. Obviously, there were a few things that happened back in March that threw a wrench in everybody's plans since then. But we are now back onto our release schedule. So November 19th is the day that school level data for 18-19 goes public in WiseDash. Before that, we're going to make the data available in WiseDash for Districts, the secure page, starting on October 15th for what we're calling a formal data quality review period. This is an opportunity for your district to take one last look at the numbers before they're released, make sure that everything looks right, that the numbers make sense to you, and that you're able to understand and articulate kind of why you're seeing some of the differences you're seeing, at least within your own district. The question we often get asked is, where did the data come from? Well, the expenditures were reported by your business offices through the school level reporting collection. That's how dollars were broken down between schools, districts, federal, state, local, and the exclusions. That's where all that was reported, and those were all total dollar amounts that got reconciled against your existing district level financial reports. The enrollments came from that WISE data, third Friday 2018 student count, which was certified for districts before the WISE data snapshot in the winter of 2018-2019. We take the two. It's a fairly straight division problem, and that's where we come up with the per pupil expenditures. Now, what we can and cannot look at through this data quality review, first piece is that how that total pot of dollars is split up among the schools, districts, exclusions. That is something that can be modified if you discover in your data quality review that some of that seems out of whack. And that's something that your business office will be able to update and refinalize that report. The enrollment numbers by themselves cannot be modified unless there's a really significant data error. So if there was one kid that you missed in your WISE data snapshot, that's not something that we're going to be able to modify. But if you had a significant issue where the reporting was off and half your high school is missing, that is something that we can address. There is an existing item called the WISE data errata, where after public snapshots are taken, that's the method that districts and LEAs use to report those types of broader-based issues with your data. So you'll have to submit that, get that into WISE data, and then we can make an adjustment to your enrollment in combination with that data errata. The other type of enrollment adjustment we can make is if you have students that just because of how costs are allocated or identified in your district, it would make sense to have them in a different denominator than the one they would default to. One example might be for a district who has 4K through community partners, but they don't have a 4K school type program reported to DPI. You might have those costs are sort of a district-wide cost, but those students are in your administratively tied to their home elementary schools for reporting purposes. That's something where we can talk about adjusting those numbers to make sure per pupil math is reflecting where costs are reported. So if your district or LEA does notice an issue requiring modification, you can send an email to our school finance team email, which is shown on the slide, by November 16th. And we will need to know both your district LEA and the schools what the enrollment modifications are by school, and then an explanation for the request. And then we'll evaluate and follow up on that. There are a variety of resources available to get ready for this reporting requirement. We've started compiling a specific page on ESSA reporting resources. It does include things like what's called the school level spending school toolkit from the Council of Chief State School Officers, basically a set of communications templates to start rolling out your information for this. There are some resources from the National Associations of Elementary School and Secondary School Principals. They put out specifically for the principal point of contact. That was something that I think earlier on in the development and launch process was a bit lacking, but one thing that we observed and that I know that those associations observed was that principals are very, very often sort of that first point of contact for parents as far as the face of the district goes beyond their children's teachers. So those are really put in place by those two associations, and they're great resources. I'd rather link to them than try to crib them and make them Wisconsin specific, to be able to start being able to talk about these numbers so that when a parent does come in and talk to you as a principal, you start to familiarize yourself with these numbers. Also videos, definitions, technical resources, and there's more that are going to be rolling out, including the recording of this webinar as we move on to November 19th. So before we get to questions, I just want to summarize that the number one thing to take away from this is that total per pupil number, not the school district breakouts, not the state, local, federal breakouts, but that total is really what people are going to be focusing on. Along with that, making sure that you know the stories behind the numbers, be able to talk about them, and connect them to your successes and the things going on in your district. And that's going to be the best thing you can do to get ready for this reporting requirement. This is my contact information. Again, the slides will be up on our school finance team website, and I'll send a link to that once those are up, along with the webinar recording to the list of folks who signed up for this session. That concludes the prepared portion of the presentation. I think we'll open it up now for questions. So Cody, if there's anything going in the chat, we can go ahead and get started addressing those.
There's one question that's popped up asking about suggestions for how to combine our current accounts.
And sorry, can you clarify a little bit, Jeannie, if you can come off of, I don't know if you've dialed in by phone if you're on PC, but I don't know if you can take yourself off of mute. I'm not quite sure what you mean by combining your current accounts.
So we are looking at putting our current, I have what, 3740 that I handle daily at an elementary level. And we are looking at how best to put those in a more compacted or concise set of accounts for our future accounting purposes in the district. And each building has been asked to look at how we want to look at which accounts would fit together best.
Okay. I know that this is prompting a lot of districts to look at their accounting setups and their financial setups and their practices. In addition to some other things, you may have been talking with your business offices about GASB 84 and student activity accounts. That's another financial reporting piece that is definitely affecting building level things. I think really it's just a discussion between you and your business office as far as how to sort of meet both of your mutual needs now that their reporting and accounting requirements have changed. Unfortunately, I can't really give you a lot of concretes on that because we have 421 school districts and 2,400 public schools and a number of independent charter organizations in Wisconsin of various sizes. So, it's really tough to kind of come up with a sort of hard and fast thing other than just making sure that you and your business office are communicating. And if something is not working for you, or if it seems to be going in a direction that isn't effective, let them know, and then encourage them to do vice versa and have them let you know if things are going in the wrong direction. But unfortunately, I can't really think of any specific tips that would be applicable to all schools on kind of updating your chart of accounts and accounting pieces for this requirement and for the other financial reporting requirements that your school business colleagues are dealing with. I appreciate your time. I hope you found this to be helpful. If you do have any more questions, again, daniel.bush@dpi.wi.gov is my email. We'll have this up on the website. And like I said, I will send a note to everyone who signed up for the meeting once the slides go up, so you have access to those. Thanks very much, and I wish you a good rest of your Monday. Take care.